And joining us now on the debate for the full hour, in Las Vegas, Nevada, Reiner Spencer, founder and director of the Afro-American Studies program at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And with us here in studio, Minelle Mahtani, professor of geography and journalism at University of Toronto. Ravi Jain, an immigration lawyer with the Toronto firm Green and Spiegel. Jean Teye, partner in the law firm Pape, Salter, Teye, and the great-grandniece of Louis Riel. And Sarah Grzinczyk is completing a master's degree at the University of Toronto. Hello to you all.
Hello, thanks for having us.
So just before we get underway, I want to start by bringing up some statistics. This comes from the 2006 Federal Canadian Census. Take a look at these numbers. In 2006, 3.9%, or some 7.5 million Canadian couples, were in mixed unions. And if we compare that to 5 years earlier, back in 2001, the percentage of mixed unions was 3.1%. A decade before that, 2.6%. So that really means in a 5-year period between 2001 and 2006, mixed unions grew at a very rapid pace, 33%. And that figure is 5 times the growth for all couples. So clearly, people from different backgrounds are marrying and entering into unions. It's a growing trend, and you all are children of multiracial relationships. So I want to start by going around to all of you and ask you, from a purely biological position, what is your background? Reiner, why don't you start us off?
Oh, well, from a purely biological background, well, I'm a racial skeptic, first of all, so I hesitate to give my sort of racial pedigree. But for the sake of answering your question, my mother would be considered white, my father would be considered black.
Okay, thanks for doing that. Jean, go ahead. What's your background?
My mother is Polish and Scottish, and my father is French and Métis. So, and the Métis mix is basically Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, and French.
Okay.
So,
Ravi Jain, what's your background?
Interesting. Well, first of all, I want to share Reiner's perspective here because I am similarly a racial skeptic. I think there's more genetic difference between, like, amongst races than even between them. But I think, nevertheless, it can be useful for social policy, et cetera, to have an understanding of race because that's how we're all perceived. But to answer your question, my father's from India and my mother's from the States, Caucasian background. So that's my mixed identity.
Sarah, we're going to talk, I just want to say we are going to talk about how all this stuff influences policy as we move on. But Sarah, I'm going to put the same question to you.
Okay. My mother is Filipino and my father is Serbian, but I was born here.
Okay.
So.
Minelle.
I think this question around how do you identify yourself is a really complicated one because I think you change the way you identify yourself differently in different spaces. But for the sake of thinking about racial categories, my mother is Iranian and Muslim, and my father was Indian and Hindu. So I come from a multi-religious as well as a mixed race background.
Okay, I'm going to ask you all another question. I'm going to start with you, and that is about self-identifying. So how do you self-identify, Sarah, or Minelle, pardon me?
No, that's okay. Well, really, again, really depends on where I am and thinking about at what stage of my life I'm at. I do research with women of mixed race, and I ask them this exact question. How do you think about the ways in which you identify differently? And it really does change over time. I do identify as mixed race now, but when I was younger, there wasn't even this vocabulary to think about mixed race. This is a really relatively recent phenomenon. And people do change the way they identify differently over time. And in the work that I do, what was really interesting is that the women, when they were younger, didn't think about themselves as mixed. Often they wanted to think about themselves as white, and they moved through the category. And mostly it's in college or university that they begin to think about identifying as mixed. So you definitely see changes over time and through exposure of understanding this new language.
Okay, but I want to know, how do you self-identify? Sitting at this table right now, if I said self-identify yourself.
No, for me, I definitely identify as mixed race. That is a really important political category for me to occupy. And for me, it really takes into consideration all these different aspects of my identity to understand that I'm not just one or the other. I am all these things, and I really do honor and understand the contribution that all these different parts have made for me to think about the ways in which I can contribute to different contributions to social justice and the way I'm affiliated to these racial groups.
How about the rest of you? How do you self-identify? Ravi, how do you do it?
So you say Ravi, it could be Ravi, right?
It could be Ravi. I'll probably call you a little bit of both.
With an Indian background. Well, in my career, I would say East Indian. I mean, I think that's the way I'm perceived by my clients. I think my dual identity helps my clients because I'm sort of, you know, on the one hand, I understand Indian culture because I've been to India many times with my father, and grew up somewhat in the Indian community. But then again, my high school was very white, and and I had a very white upbringing with my mother, especially being the Caucasian, raising us for the most part. So I would say. Professionally, there is that perception, and it's actually beneficial in a way because Indians want to hire other Indians, So, but having said that, in terms of my every other sphere of my life, I would definitely say mixed because I do think that I got the best of both worlds in a lot of ways. So,
You need to explain the difference between Ravi and Ravi.
Well, it's interesting because, I remember it was very important to me when I was dating, if I dated someone with an Indian background, then she would naturally say Ravi, correctly. And if my mother says Ravi, but there are very, very close people in my life, my mother's family who pronounce my name in different ways, Ravi or Ravi. My good friends say Ravi, and my wife currently says Ravi, which is very interesting to me. I've never really corrected her. Throughout our courting stages, and so it changes throughout my day.
I think you just did. Television.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah, I know, I should be careful about
You said
that.
you're married, and I want to
Yes.
ask you a personal question. What
Yes.
background's your wife?
Well, it's not. I mean, I dated various backgrounds, but it just so happened that fell in love and decided to marry someone who was Caucasian and very mainstream Canadian, actually.
Interesting. I was reading a statistic yesterday from the census, and 56% of people like you and I, who are visible minorities but live in Canada of South Asian descent, marry people outside South Asians. And I was quite actually surprised by that number. I thought it was higher than I imagined.
It is the highest rate of intermarriages happening between actually South Asian men and white women right now.
Huh.
Really?
Yeah.
There you go.
And yet I see arranged marriages all the time.
Well, that's it, right? So that's why we're kind of thinking about these figures and trying to make sense of it. I mean, we've always known that the Japanese have the highest rate of intermarriage, right? So it goes Japanese first and then this new figure, but we were trying to make sense of this new jump.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Make sense of it for me, Minelle. What is the reason you study this stuff? What do you think?
I think a lot of it has to do with the way in which we think about it. We used to assume that it was mostly black men who were, in fact, intermarrying with white women. But because there's been social acceptance around the idea of South Asian men dating white women, I think that that's really allowed for this kind of growth in the figures.
Well, there's better be acceptance of South Asian women with Caucasian men, because that's what my husband is. So I hope there's acceptance. There is in my family and amongst my friend and colleague circle. So I hope other people do that
my
well.
sister did too. She married someone. She's with someone who happens to be Caucasian. So.
There you go. Reiner, I want to ask you. Let's clear the air about terminology. What is the correct way? I know you don't. You said you don't like this certain pedigree, but what do you see as the correct way of referring to people who come from various racial backgrounds?
Oh, there is no. Well, when you say correct way, I mean there's no correct way. When
What's
I
your
start
preferred way?
anything I write. Well, when I start anything I write, whether it's a book or an article or a book chapter, the first footnote is always an explanation of the terms I use in a particular piece of writing. So, it's kind of a convention that we have to use. So, particularly for me as a racial skeptic, I don't want to use black, white, mixed race, but in order to communicate effectively and to get rid of these ideas, I have to. So acceptable terms are mixed race that I've come across with. Mixed race, multiracial, biracial. These are terms that people understand, so we can have debate about them.
Let me ask Sarah you this. I feel uncomfortable using the term, and I don't really know why, mixed race. I don't know why I feel uncomfortable. Do you feel okay with that term?
It's better than mutt or half-breed, because a lot of people do use those terms, and they can be derogatory
Yeah.
terms. So at this point, mixed race is a lot better than those terms.
Tell me stories about, you've clearly had personal experience with being called
Yes.
derogatory terms.
Well, I kind of feel like the race piece is, they say race is a social construct, but it does have ramifications. And I remember going to church at a young age, to an Orthodox church with my mother and father and my sister. And my mother is brown, my father is white, and we walked in the church and everyone stared. And I was thinking, is it because they think it's a disgrace that my father married someone out of his own race, or that he has children? But I could feel how uncomfortable I was at age 7. So I was thinking, I thought this could be a form of racism, but I didn't know at that time. But when I look back at it, I thought, wow, they really did not like us being there.
How old are you?
Right now?
Yes.
33.
So some 25 years later, this story still resonates with you. You remember it
Yes,
clearly.
there's many stories like that. Like another time I went to a nightclub and a man said to me, "Oh, you know,